Uber drivers, what's the deepest secrets you've overheard in your car? I haven't really heard anything too juicy, but so far my favorite was this one. I picked up two guys in downtown LA. From their conversation I gather they'd just met at the bar I picked them up from and were going home to hook up. One was younger and clean cut. The other was older and rather scruffy. So I'm driving up Main Street to the 101 and the scruffy guy starts talking about how he used to live there in the 90s and it was a whole lot scummier back then. He mentions he used to have an older boyfriend back then. The boyfriend would call the scruffy guy and tell him to walk down to the sidewalk in a tied-off shirt and Daisy Dukes. Then the boyfriend would drive up in his car and the scruffy guy would lean in his window and the boyfriend would ask him how much. And the scruffy guy would get in and they'd roleplay that he was a prostitute and the boyfriend was his John. The clean-cut guy kinda glossed over this and moved the conversation along. But I thought to myself that scenario sounds hot as hell. Picked up a girl mid-Saturday. She was a bit upset and a little teary and opened up to me. Turned out a business she had started was failing and she was in debt and had turned to stripping on the side to cover the bills. She said the pay was good but she kept getting really sick from all the booze she felt obliged to drink. Part of her job was making guys spend money at the bar. She hated it and felt trapped and kept asking me what I would do in her situation. I'm a guy, so kind of hard for me to answer. Tried to give her the best advice I could think of, like getting the tax office to withhold tax for a while. But couldn't help really. Only thing I could do was end the trip early. Other one was a couple of off-duty cops who didn't want their friends to know they were using it. Uber is still in a legal grey area here. A buddy overheard his passengers, wannabe London rude boys on a gang initiation, saying that when they got to their destination, some rival gang member or some other pathetic shit, they would throw a brick through a window followed by some Molotov cocktails and then stab anyone that may run outside. Having been a London cabbie for a long time, he's seen a lot of nonsense, so simply told them that he didn't have time to refuel before getting their call and would need to go to a petrol station. Called the police while paying for said petrol. Took the long way round to their destination. And then watched as the two lads got arrested by the waiting police, where they found a bag full of some large kitchen knives and 3 vodka bottles full of petrol. Fortunately the cops also made a show of arresting him so as to take any focus off him informing them. As far as the idiots were concerned, an anonymous tip brought the cops there. He's also had an investment banker fund manager talking and crying over the phone to her therapist about losing over $15 million and not sure if she had a job. Parents' disapproval. Should commit suicide. Or whatever. She didn't give a shit about the people who that money actually belonged to. Finally, some low-grade politician having sex with a hooker. They had no destination. The politician's kink was public sex in a moving vehicle. Picked up 2 girls late one night. Both smoking hot and dressed for the club. During the drive, one starts to casually discuss her neighbor and his wife. She mentions he owns a well-known bar and that he and his wife are swingers. They're also getting a divorce because they started hooking up with locals instead of doing it out of town, and you should never do that because when you start sleeping with people on a regular basis, emotions get involved and things get messy. She wasn't taking her own advice, it seems, because at the end of the ride I dropped them both off at a swingers club. Not the driver, but the rider in the car listening. Told me how he was addicted to meth for a period of time. Had sex with a girl who dealt him the meth. And then had to marry her because they had a kid. Finally got through and tried to turn his life around. Worked 3 jobs and did his best to support his now 3 children. All great kids. Divorced his wife who still lives with her mother. Joint custody of his kids. But the now ex-wife takes all the money from child support without splitting it with him when he's taking care of the kids. Was going to court to settle the issue with his ex 2 days after he dropped me off. Didn't have much hope since the judge always sides with the girl. Halloween is always terrible since he can never go trick-or-treating with his kids since it's his ex's birthday and she always takes them that day. Also, the cheeseburger pizza at Papa John's is pretty banging according to him. I drive in a college town and I picked up a local chick from a bar passed out drunk. I was extremely hesitant, but the bartender himself stepped out to assure me she had already puked for an hour and was ready to get home. He hands me her ID and says take her here. However, the Uber app is telling me to take her elsewhere. Given her slumpness, I just took her to the address on her ID, which was 40 minutes outside the city. I did T-mind because prices were surging and I would be looking at figures. About 25 minutes passed and I get a call from her boyfriend. He says something along the lines of how far away are you? I say 15 and hang up. He calls me back and asks where I'm taking her. I explain the situation and he then tells me that's the wrong address and to bring her to him. I finally pull up and he comes into the car and wakes her up and she begins freaking TF out. I'm talking flailing like a 5-year-old. Yelling things like why am I here, I don't want to be with you. I do want it to happen again. Needless to say, I was shocked and had the worst guilty conscience, thinking I redirected her from her home to an abusive situation with a potentially abusive boyfriend. Not the driver, but chatted with one of my Lyft drivers and asked a similar question. He picked up some guy from a hotel and they started talking since it was a pretty long ride to the airport. Apparently the guy came for a business conference and ended up fucking a married lady who was very high up in the company. Like VP of sales high up. He then proceeded to show the Lyft driver pictures and a video of what they did last night. Before you ask. Yes. I did ask if the girl in the pictures was hot and he confirmed she was. Lucky son of a bitch. This was only about my 10th ride. I picked up these two girls from a house late at night. They seemed about mid-20s and one was more attractive than the other. Anyway, it was about a 35-minute ride since there was no traffic, and halfway through the more attractive one starts talking about what she was doing at the house I picked them up from. Turns out it was her first time trying to get paid for sex and she kept going on about how paranoid the guy was and how he almost got violent because he thought she might be an undercover cop. She had to show him her FB profile and license to convince him. Not an Uber driver, but I have a story about a black cab driver I had once in London. Once he found out I was from Brighton, gay capital of the UK, he presumed I was gay. Then starts talking to me about gay friends I have. Gay clubs. About how he used to live there. Then chatting about his statistics. I did a virology bus, so we were chatting about it. And basically about 15 minutes in admits he has a wife but doesn't love her and fancies some young fella from his local. Very awkward, go say the least. But then he started asking about more and more intimate questions. About my package size. And sex stories I have. But on the positive, I got a 5 and knocked off my fare cause I showed him a dick pic. So I had been driving for Uber for almost a year. I didn't drive full time. Just some weekends and nights for extra money. I've had my fair share of oddballs and weirdos. But this one takes the cake. It was a little after 3. Most of my rides had been drunken people going in and out of downtown. This one was strange because he was getting picked up from a house in the city but just outside of downtown. I pick the guy up and his destination is only a few blocks away. Weird. He sits up front and asks how my night was. All the standard questions. About 2 minutes and he breaks it down for me. Okay, listen. I'm not gay. I'm a married man. But I want to give you a blowjob. I literally laughed out loud at first, thinking he was joking. He goes on to explain he just loves doing it. Wants nothing to do with me other than that. I was in shock. As a straight man, this was the first time I've had to say no to a BJ. I said no numerous times. But he persisted until I stopped the ride about a block away from his destination and said get out. I realized he was just going up and down the block requesting Ubers in the hopes of giving out BJs. It was kind of sad though. He showed me his ring and swore up and down he wasn't gay. He just had some weird thing about blowing other guys. I reported him to Uber and never heard from him again. TL. DR. Drove Uber. Guy tried to give me a BJ. He persisted. Kicked him out. Lyft driver here. My very first night I picked up a couple that started a fight in the club and brought it into the car. They were arguing over baby names. But the girl was screaming her head off. Since it's my first night, I try to take authority and say, Mum, I need to ask you to not shout or I'll have to end the ride right here. Well, she didn't like that one bit. She says, "I know where the fuck I am." Then proceeds to open the door in the middle of me driving. I get her back in. I drive like a maniac to drop the couple off at home and leave. The dude understood. He left a solid tip. Not an Uber driver, but drove a taxi in my small town for a while. One time I was bringing this couple back from the bar to a small town about 20 minutes outside of town. Most people use the ride to try and fool around in the backseat or do coke. These two people were going at it like animals. I had to tell them to keep their clothes on or else they'd be cleaning the car out personally. It was at this time that, for no fucking reason whatsoever, the guy says to me, "Don't tell anybody you saw us." Because we are first cousins, and then went back to some heavy making out and fondling. I had no idea who they were. Would have never connected the dots they were cousins. I thought nothing abnormal of the relationship that was aggressively forming in the backseat until they revealed their big secret. Lots of other stupid stuff happened, but that mild incident sticks out in my mind the most. I always ask my Uber Lyft drivers for their most interesting stories. This one is the top so far. The driver picked up a couple. The couple had a fight in the car. The guy in the couple gets out, walks a few extra blocks to his home to get away from her, even though before getting in they had both planned on getting out at the same place. The girl in the couple asks the Uber driver to go to her sister's apartment first, then drive back to the guy's apartment. The driver did as he was asked, since a fare is a fare. But since the girl was drunk, she started opening up a bit and revealed that she was going to her sister's place to pick up some moral support and a gun. The driver dropped her off but refused to drive her back to the boyfriend's apartment. TLDR. A girl asked an Uber driver to drive her to pick up a gun and then aid her in committing a hit on her boyfriend. So mine isn't necessarily Uber. Mainly cause it was before Uber existed, but I was essentially an Uber driver for a night. My freshman year of college I went to a house party that was already in full swing. One of the guys who lived in the house had a really nice motorcycle. Well, one belligerent drunk guy accidentally knocked it over and it got dented. So the owner of the bike comes bursting out about to fight belligerent dude. When people wouldn't let them fight, motorcycle guy threatens to shut down the party if belligerent doesn't leave. So being the only sober one and the only one with a car, I offer to take him back to the dorms. His soberish roommate offers to help and one of my friends offers to go with me. Being a girl by myself with two intoxicated college football players made her nervous. So we embark back to the dorms. I roll down my windows, hoping I can make belligerent sober up a bit. No dice. He is just shouting and yelling completely incoherent things and his roommate is trying to shut him up. And here's where it gets interesting. Belligerent turns to his roommate and yells, "I'm going to butt fuck you tonight and you're going to like it." His roommate immediately denies any butt fucking. But belligerent is on a roll and keeps saying how it's gonna happen and there's nothing that the roommate can do. Needless to say, I was really happy when they got belligerent out of my car. I was the passenger. This driver was so large that he spilled over the armrest in his Cadillac, leaving little room for my cousin in the front. We were going to a wedding, and my wife made some joke about one of the guy cousins dressing up as a woman. The driver chuckled and launched into a story about going to Mexico with some friends and visiting a hooker, which quickly shocked us into silence. "Gary goes first," he said. Then I go. And when I'm in there I find out she's actually a man. I thought this was somehow the punchline, but I was wrong. He continued. "The funny part is, me and Gary don't tell Bill who went last. So he goes in thinking it's a girl. Ha ha ha. We all spent the final few minutes of the ride in pained silence." 4 stars. I drive a rickshaw, giant tricycle taxi. I'm waiting outside the most expensive club in town for the kickout when this guy, pupils like saucers and pure panic, leaps into my bike and shouts, "Go go go. I'll pay you anything, just go." These bikes don't even have engines and he clearly wants a high-speed getaway. No taxis at this time of night though. I gather from his terror gibbering, half on the phone half to me, that he's a career criminal. Drugs I reckon. and he's been having a banging night on the cane. These guys from the bad neighborhoods are always in it for the reputation, so they all know each other. He'd recognized one of the hardcore violence gangs in the club and had decided in his drugged up state it would be a good idea to party with them. It had all been going well till one of them had punched him in the face, and now he thought they were out to kill him. He got on the phone to some boys, trying to rally the troops, saying things like tell him to look under the floorboards in the kitchen. There's something there he needs to grab. This whole time we're traveling uphill at about 3 miles an hour. I got to as far as our license allows us. Wasn't too keen to take him to his front door in case he was right about it all. He emptied his wallet, gave me a handshake and a hug, and sprinted off into the night. Coke's a hell of a drug. Not while driving Uber, though I've done some of that in addition to taxi. Small town. Own a taxi company. Make money off of Uber as a monopoly. Collusion is still alive and well. Anyway, the story. I was driving a couple of drunk friends and the one guy was lamenting being in his dorm with this girl he thinks really wants him, but he doesn't know how to approach it. He says her smile and everything drives him crazy. He really wants to have sex with her, but he doesn't know how to really go about it because it could go all wrong. He looks for confirmation and the green light by sharing his story. His best friend says, "It's not that simple. You see, it's his cousin. He wants to fuck his cousin and it's going to be bad." Double quote. He explains that yes, in fact it's his cousin, but they grew up differently. She's really hot, and he really wants her. And it's not actually as bad as it sounds because she's a married-in cousin, actually only like a half cousin. I never even worried about trying to mind bend how that would be possible or not. I conclude that he's probably going to have some bad days ahead of him at family reunions if he pushes forward. But just for the hell of it, encourage him to make the move. Maybe he gets laid by his cousin. I've asked this question countless times to Uber drivers. Usually I don't get anything that's worth remembering since it's normal stories about drunk people. But here's one that stands out. Uber driver says he picks up 3 Brazilians. 2 girls and a guy. He said all 3 were attractive. One of the girls and a guy start making out. Not that unusual per the other stories here, but the story takes a turn when the other girl in the car, the one not sucking face, tells the driver that the couple making out are twins. Brother and sister. She said they do that when they get drunk together. He said it was the purest form of narcissism he's ever witnessed. Just the other night a girl climbed in the backseat with her bag on the way to the airport. She was on the phone with her boyfriend and they were having a bit of a tiff. Apparently she was about to board a one-way plane to go move in with him. Ended up driving her back home after going all the way there. Her in tears, as they had apparently decided maybe living together wasn't such a good idea. Trouble I forgot to turn the stereo back on and couldn't just turn on music in the middle of her phone conversation, so I tried my best to listen to the air conditioning fan in silence both there and back. Made myself a cool $26. Late to the party. But I once drove some well-dressed Russians in between bars on the west side of Chicago. I used to work for a Russian-owned cab company and I understand a little Russian. And I heard 2 of them talking back and forth about something one of them was very anxious about. The phrases that jumped out at me were, "This is death. This is serious. Blood is on me. And I'm not a bad man." The other guy was mainly just telling him to relax a lot. And telling him there are no fools here. Or something along those lines. Upon dropping them off, like an idiot, I temporarily blanked that I had just heard parts of a seemingly harrowing conversation. And I said Cisadilla L, which is pronounced Dobroy Nochi and means good night. Only one of them heard me, the older guy telling his colleague to relax, and he just stared at me. Then he came around to my window while reaching into his coat pocket, which scared me shitless. He then pulled out a $100 and said, in English, "My friend, do we understand?" Double quote. I just took it, shook my head in the affirmative, and drove off. I didn't take any rides for the rest of the night. Picked up a girl who had to go to work across town. Her boyfriend and her were arguing in the parking lot as I was approaching. Girl gets in my car and she's worried she's not going to get to work on time and she would be fired if she was late. Get about a block away and my phone rings. I answered and tried to get it off my Bluetooth stereo to no avail. The person on the other line was her BF and he said he wanted to apologize about his GF and that I shouldn't listen to her because she was a crazy BTCH. She heard all of it and didn't say a thing. Very awkward. Finally get her to work and she asks me to stay in the parking lot as she goes in and quits her job. She gets back a few minutes later and on the way home tells me that her boyfriend once broke her arm in an argument and that he was going to be very mad at her and she was worried about going back home but to take her there anyway. Ended up dropping her off and calling non-emergency, but I have no clue if anything ever happened with it. Not so much a dark secret, as much as a potentially dark situation. Driving around waiting for pings. Get one at a popular bar. Pull up and a young woman flags me down. Gives me her name. Asks for mine. I'm her ride. Easy enough. There's a guy with her. They're both quite drunk. She says goodnight to him and gets in the rear passenger side door. Homeboy isn't having it. Decides he's coming with. Starts trying to convince her. Despite her saying she has work early. Wants to get to sleep. But he's not taking no for an answer. It's getting a bit weird as he's getting more and more pushy aggressive about it. To the point that she's clearly uncomfortable. I step out of the car. And say over the top of the car, hey man. If she says you're not getting in the car. You're not getting in the car. He looks over at me with hate in his eyes. I'm a bit tense. Not knowing this kid's deal. He slams the door. Walks away. Talking shit as he goes, really? Talking shit as you walk away? What a hardus. Get back in the car. Girl seems a little more sober after the experience. And is shaken up over it. Take her back home. Make sure she gets in safe. Not as scary or as weird as it could have been. But the dude gave off a bad vibe and I'm glad he took the hint and fucked off. My husband had a couple that broke up in the backseat of his car while driving for Uber. The woman made fun of her boyfriend's ex. And was talking about how she had bad teeth. The boyfriend said her teeth were fine and that she was being really judgy. She then asked him if he was still in love with his ex. He thought for a moment. Said yes. And she started crying. There was some kind of confusion about where to get dropped off since she just wanted to go home and he wanted to go somewhere the opposite direction. Super awkward for my husband. Not my story. But I had an Uber driver tell me this one. So I hope it counts by proxy. Uber driver George is doing Uber pool one night in Austin where you pick up multiple people en route to the destination. First girl number one gets in the car alone and sits in the backseat on the passenger side. Then a couple, guy and girl, comes. And there's not enough room for everyone in the back. So girl number 2 sits behind the driver and guy sits up front. The two girls in the back start chatting and seem to be getting along well. Girl number 1 asks what they are doing tonight. And girl number 2 says, "Oh. Me and my boyfriend Josh are going out to celebrate. Josh works at XX and just got a promotion." At this point, George notices Josh is crouching down in his seat and looking guilty. Then, girl number 1 says, "That's funny. My boyfriend is also named Josh and works at XX. I wonder if they know each other." Then girl number 2 starts tapping her boyfriend on the shoulder and bugging him to turn around to meet girl number 1. At some point Josh can't avoid the introduction anymore. And is forced to turn around. He does so with a look of utter horror on his face. As it slowly dawns on both girls that they are dating the same Josh. Anyway. Both girls start screaming and kick Josh out of the Uber. Not sure what happened after that. But you can bet Josh never took Uber pool again. Not an Uber driver. Work for a smallish cab company. We have a contract with schools in the area to transport seniors to this graduate program so they wouldn't drop out. Usually criminal or bad behaved kids. Etc. Anyway, I was assigned to this one kid from sophomore year. Heard some fucked up things from other students about him, like he fucked a guy in public. Fucked a dog. So on. He was usually quiet. Most conversations I started with him kinda just ended from awkward silence or him just ending it. One year he starts being more confident around me. Told me loads of fucked up things. Mom abused him. Stole college money. Raped few years ago. Most bad things I heard about him were he was gay and he said that was about that. Etc. After that he tells me about his drug endeavors, I guess you'd call it. He actually gave me some seeds for growing for free. Last year I knew him, he was getting with a lot of girls from the school. Every day had me drove him with different girls. Eventually stuck with one. Told me about how some of these innocent girls did some crazy shit with him. Disappeared halfway through the year. Overheard from other drivers he killed himself. Oh man. Something relevant to me and I'm late. I had someone get in my car. Told me he's in his late 20s and that he's having sex with a girl who just recently turned 18. I awkwardly told him that's good for him and he proceeded to tell me that it's not. That his life sucks and everything he does to make himself happy doesn't work. He told me he watches vids of people committing suicide and wishes he had the courage they did to go through with it. He told me he's going to go to San Francisco and spend every last penny he has on vacation and just jump off the Golden Gate Bridge when he's done. I didn't really know what to say. When I dropped him off I told him that I hope things start looking up and he just said they won't. They never do and left. He also asked weird questions like, if I hit you would you kick my ass? When I said I'd rather no one hit anyone he said, dude. You'll whoop my ass, I'm a fucking piece of shit. Double quote. Hope he got help. Never overheard a juicy secret. But plenty of interesting packs. One time I had a group of 3 guys. Probably around my age, mid-20s. They seemed nervous. Avoided eye contact. And were pretty much silent from the moment they hopped in. I tried confirming the destination. Asked how their night was going. etc. But only got muffled mumbling in return. As always. I worked the situation out in my head in a calm, rational manner. Something like, are these guys trying to rob me? Jack my car? Did they just kill somebody? Am I an accessory to murder? Do they have knowledge of the impending apocalypse? Double quote. But as my paranoia routine winded down, I slowly started to realize what was going on. Between the beads of sweat, occasional jaw clenching, and finally, random giggle outbursts. These kids were tripping fucking balls. Once it hit me I called them out immediately and told them I was cool. They looked so relieved. I started blasting music, some Humphreys McGee I do believe, and they just started geeking out by that point. Fun ride. At the end of the ride, the guy that sat up front tossed me a bag of shrooms. Good times. Not my story but my mom's. She does rides in San Diego, which is a city that loves its Navy and is where future SEAL go to buds. My mom was telling me one time that she gave a ride to a young man about 20 years old. He had been fighting to become a SEAL his whole life and ended up falling asleep on the last day or two of buds and getting dropped for the season. He was just crushed because he made it through everything before and now he would have to wait before being able to enroll again and would be starting from scratch. Anyway. During the ride he started to open up to my mom about his other passion, which was medicine, and she suggested he chase that dream instead because he came off as a very caring and devoted person. At the end of the ride he asked her to step out of the car so he could give her a hug and a huge thanks for lending an ear and giving her honest opinion about the situation. He also left her his phone number so he could give her a call and let her know what he decided to do. A few days later he gave her a call and said he had returned back home to Texas, and would start taking courses to pursue a career in medicine. I am not an Uber driver, but I have one that was told to me. This driver told me that he picked up his last fare for the day and it did not have a final destination. The dude gets in the car coked out of his mind yelling on the phone. The guy says drive to Vegas. Here. And the guy tosses $500 bucks at him. That is on top of the Uber fare, which apparently was surge pricing. So the guy drives him to Vegas. From Los Angeles takes about 4 hours. The whole time the guy is talking yelling on the phone to his mom. They get to Vegas and he drops the dude off at some mansion where his mom is outside waiting to yell at him. Apparently the guy forgot about giving him the cash because he tossed another few $100 at him. Got out of the car and split. Two 40-something guys who I picked up from a bar were talking on a phone speaker, and they were trying to make plans with a third guy who was at a party with a bunch of drunk 12th graders. Exact words. One guy in my car asked if there was anyone younger there. Other dude said, "Dude, really?" Comma. Followed by silence. Then he said, "Fucking sweet." Not sure as there was missing context, but it sounded like there was younger teenagers there already drunk and these older dudes were going to pick up. One time I was driving a dude for a bit of a long trip. Was gonna take around 25-30 minutes. He wasn't hammered, but definitely a bit drunk. It was late and he must have been feeling a bit down. So he confided in me and asked me for some advice. He told me he's madly in love with his fiance's best friend and he couldn't back out now. He'd been with this girl 4 years. And engaged for 1. Ready to be married in a few months. It was pretty sad to hear. Because it wasn't just your average story. It was filled with a lot of subtle emotional and mental anguish. The guy went through about 5 years of ups and downs with his girl. And found an innocent friend and comfort in the best friend. After a few years, he developed feelings and it was just downhill from there. Felt bad for the guy because he seemed like he was truly in love with his fiancée too. Although he had strong feelings for this friend. He knew that going through with the marriage meant a lifetime of being around the friend and suppressing feelings. But also breaking it off meant that he lost the girl of his dreams. Seemed like a genuinely nice guy. And I hope he's doing okay. I picked up this young overly affectionate couple that spent the entire trip making out in my backseat and telling each other that they loved each other. Cute. So I drop off the couple and head on my way to pick up my text fare. I hear a cell phone ring in my backseat. Realize it's my previous rides. And pick up the phone to let them know I have it and I'll come back to drop it off. Turns out it was the guy's wife phoning to check in on him while he was on a business trip. Which he was thoroughly enjoying with his mistress. Former Uber driver here. Picked a girl up, a sweet girl from a bar on a Wednesday night, absolutely hammered. About 10 PM. She got into my car. Apologized for being so drunk and politely asked if we could just drive around a little while. With the windows down. I was prepping for a cleaning fee. Trying to drive and pull a vomit bag out of the glove box. But no. She just did that airplane thing with one hand out the backseat window. She asked me if I had ever thought about dying. To which I replied, "Yeah, I guess so." That's when she told me that she had cancer. It was in her brain and it was too far gone to consider chemo. I remember my heart just pounding. She told me she was dying and she was going to be okay. Tonight she was celebrating with her work friends who threw her a going away party. She told them she was taking a position abroad. I just didn't tell them that abroad was heaven. Double quote. Jesus. Fucking Christ. I turned off my app and cried my ass all the way home. Seriously, is there a lot less from Uber drivers? Not a driver, but a passenger here. Was once picked up in the Bay Area by a very respectable looking gentleman driving Uber Black. Mid-40s. Salt plus pepper professor sorta vibe. Really nice guy. I work in digital security and was in the area for a large event. So he starts talking about the industry. Things related to government surveillance and the like. It's apparent that he's an intelligent guy who understands the nuances of tech and legal issues related to tech. Which makes for a rare but great conversation. Eventually, he begins to tell us about how there is a lot of research going on at Stanford to use the color spectrum for encryption. I'd not heard about this work before. So it was initially interesting. He kept trying to explain, without really saying anything meaningful, how this was going to change the world and revolutionize privacy for us regular people and prevent the government from snooping around in our business. He then proceeded to tell us that tires were going to be the reason humanity doesn't survive beyond 2020. Yeah. You read that right. Tires. It seems that tires and other vulcanized rubber products used in high friction applications create rubber dust that's polluting everything. All that black staining you see on cars in the city? It's not soot, dirt, dust, etc. That's dirtying those cars. It's rubber particulate. It's destroying our oceans. Causing cancer. Creating holes in the ozone layer. Luckily for us, this guy and some of his friends have a startup that's gonna save us from ourselves. But he's really worried he won't get the message out in time. He unleashed his vision of a rubber-free world upon us for the remaining 20 or so minutes of our ride. Each progressively weirder and less comfortable than the last. People are fucking insane. I wouldn't call this a secret, and I was driving a taxi instead of an Uber. But anyhow, I was driving a woman who just flew in from a burn center because her son there. The burn center was 1,000 miles away, and she couldn't stay there any longer because she needed to look after the rest of her family. The son was sniffing some kind of inhalant in a cave using some candles for light. Something caught on fire and her son was terribly burned. This story was all over the news, so I knew what had happened. The mother was in a bad place emotionally, and it was a long ride to her home. On the way home I told her the story of my gearhead friend who was burned up really badly in a car accident just recently. He got pinned in his car while it was burning and got really messed up. I told her how I used to pray all the time for God to take him away to end his suffering. However, to my surprise he got better again, and that I felt like an ass for hoping he would die. I mentioned that of course he wasn't 100%, but he was still the same friend I knew before he was hurt, and I was happy to have him back. When I arrived at her destination, the lady looked a lot better. She thanked me, gave me a $20 tip, and left quickly before I could refuse the tip. I felt bad for the tip. The biggest I ever got. But I was dirt poor too, and it did help. My last Uber driver told me all his secrets and recent life story. The guy was nice enough, but he had clearly been up tweaking for days. He started out the whole thing by handing us very smooth rocks he had in his console. He was very adamant about all the skulls on them. They were smooth river rocks. He kept looking for pictures on his phone to explain his stories, while saying to himself, "This is probably really dangerous," and it was. He stopped in the middle of the road each time he checked for a photo. He told us he's living in his RV with his girlfriend, who might be having sex with the homeless guy who had just moved in with his disabled son last month. He was upset because the dad spent all the kids' disability money on stupid things he found at swap meets. He said he hadn't worked Uber for a week. I'm pretty sure he hadn't slept that entire time. Edit. Paragraph order. I picked up two girls in my car that I recognized from a Facebook group we're in. They didn't recognize me, I never post, and proceeded to discuss the party they were attending. Turns out they're both sex workers using the Facebook group to recruit more girls.